The war between Ukraine and Russia is deeply shaking. The Eastern Bloc, especially Poland and the Baltic trio, are in the highest state of military preparation since the Second World War. There are two most critical countries and one city in Eastern Europe. These are Poland and Belarus. The city is Kaliningrad, as anyone can guess. Kaliningrad, which is not connected to the Russian mainland, is one of the most strategic areas of the Baltic region and, interestingly, a Russian city. Geopolitical risks in this region and the risks of the Ukraine-Russia war made NATO need to strengthen its eastern stronghold. Poland's border sharing with both Kaliningrad, Belarus, and Ukraine makes Poland the most critical country in the region and NATO's eastern stronghold. For this reason, Poland seems to have sworn to establish the strongest army in Europe to minimize regional risks. Now Poland is installing and blocking Himars systems 20 to 50 kilometers from the Russian Kaliningrad border and the Belarusian border. Let's examine the striking details and the preparations in the region after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Poland is now on the front line. The fact that Poland borders both Ukraine and Russia makes it all feel the heat of the war. That's why Poland is taking a number of measures. Let's take a look at the measures taken by Poland to protect itself from the effects of the war. Poland, one of Ukraine's key NATO allies, plans to deploy rocket launchers on its common border with Russia. The deployment of American Himars systems by Poland, close to the borders of Russia's Kaliningrad region, is seen as Warsaw's attempt to show strength. The news comes a day after Belarusian announced that the U.S. State Department had approved the sale of 800 Hellfire missiles for use in a range of support helicopters. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak said that his country plans to place a series of Himars rocket launchers on the Russian border. Błaszczak stated that the battery was purchased in 2019, and the announcement came just after Congress approved 500 Himars charging modules for the defense of Ukraine. Błaszczak said in a statement that by the end of 2023, the U.S. Himars rocket artillery systems will be at the disposal of the Polish Army's 16th Mechanized Division, which is stationed near the border with Russia's Kaliningrad region. Currently, Poland is known to have expressed a desire to deploy such systems near Russia's borders, and the 4 batteries are even capable of hitting M30 and M31 missiles at any point, although the exact number of deployed weapons has not been disclosed. Considering that the nominal Himars MLRS battery consists of 4 launchers, only 16 launchers will be enough to pose a real threat to the Kaliningrad region of Warsaw. It is likely that Russia will deploy additional air defense systems in response to such actions and deploy the Iskander-ODC on the territory of the Kaliningrad region. As it is known, Poland is the first NATO member state to provide tanks, unmanned aerial vehicles, and ammunition to Ukraine, as well as attack-capable warplanes to counterbalance air attacks. This raises concerns that Russia may escalate violence on NATO territory such as Poland. Meanwhile, Russia began to increase its influence in Poland with the intention of disrupting Polish aid to Ukraine. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kamiński said in a statement that Poland accused 6 foreigners from the eastern border for allegedly disrupting the military and aid supplies to Ukraine on behalf of Russia. Last year, a Polish man was accused of spying on NATO forces on behalf of the Russians. On the other hand, the measures taken by Poland to minimize the effects of the Ukraine war are not limited to Himars missiles. Poland has been taking a series of measures since last year. Poland is strengthening its armed forces in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and plans to increase defense spending to 3% of gross domestic product. Poland has been on a U.S. arms buying spree over the past few years that pays dividends for NATO defense along the eastern flank. Warsaw is currently on the way to purchase about 100 Apache attack helicopters, along with M101 Abrams tanks, Patriot missiles, Himars, and F-35 warplanes. Also located on the outskirts of Poland's border with Russia's Kaliningrad military enclave, the US-led NATO battle group received further support in the form of new Allied combat vehicles. The Badger. The Badger is the latest in a series of military upgrades that have been made by the Polish Army, one of the toughest ground forces in Europe. Us soldiers replace an old Soviet-era model with the vehicle that was unveiled last week, bringing it with a modernized armor and weapons to support patrolling troops in Bemowo Piskie, Poland. About 1,000 U.S. infantry and other allied troops lead NATO's multinational group responsible for defense against a potential attack from Russia. American troops cycle around Bemowo Piskie in a 6-month rotation, living in barracks near a nearly 40-acre training area where they regularly participate in exercises with forces from other NATO member states. Strategic but isolated due to its proximity to Kaliningrad, the town serves as a launching pad for allies when they need to quickly defend vulnerable parts of Allied territory, such as the Suwalki Gap, a stretch of Polish territory stretching between them. The Suwalki Gap, a sparsely populated area of Polish territory lying between Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad enclave, is strategically important because Russia's takeover would isolate the Baltic states from the rest of NATO. As we all know, Kaliningrad is the part that establishes the link between Russia and Poland. Now let's examine the effects of Kaliningrad on NATO in more detail. Russia's settlement in Kaliningrad has long been a nightmare for NATO's defense planners. The outcome of the Ukrainian war will greatly affect this future. NATO military planners have long worried about Russia's strategic Kaliningrad enclave stranded between Poland and Lithuania. Russian territory, with less than 500,000 inhabitants, has become a fixture in the security architecture of the Baltic Sea region. In the years leading up to the 2022 war in Ukraine, Russia's major moves to increase its military presence there have triggered concerns. The scenarios depend on how this war will end and whether the regime in Belarus will survive. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues to reveal catastrophic shortcomings, it becomes questionable how much of it still matters and whether Kaliningrad will play an important role in the future. However, from the distant horizon of the Kremlin, Kaliningrad can be converted from an asset to a liability. The outlook contains very different scenarios where the critical feature is about what will happen in Belarus. The first scenario occurs when Russia's definitive defeat in Ukraine leads to the collapse of the regime of dictator Alexander Lukashenko. The cessation of economic support from Russia to Belarus could lead to a cascade of crisis strikes and civil unrest, with parts of the armed forces eventually changing their allegiance. The battle-hardened Belarusian volunteer forces fighting against the Russians in Ukraine could be decisive here, returning home to help drive all remaining Russian troops from Belarus. If Belarus changes sides, the consequences for the Russian garrison in Kaliningrad will be enormous. Already exhausted from supplying troops to the war in Ukraine, the military post would find itself surrounded by hostile forces. The Suwalki Pass will lose its importance as Russia's borders in the west would recede roughly to their position at the end of the 16th century. Communication channels between Poland and Lithuania will be wide open. As a result, a middle ground is possible where Russia suffers a decisive loss in Ukraine. But Belarus still messes things up. Under this scenario, the country offers a perspective for the Kremlin to expand its future influence towards Kaliningrad in the EU. But it would be a weak link in constant danger of breaking. The obvious alternative to a clear Russian defeat is a dubious deal. Western stability may dissipate over time. The leading European powers might succeed in mediating a peace plan that would allow Russia to retain control over Ukraine and keep Belarus in the Russian camp. This scenario gives vengeful Russian leaders access to resources. War is the biggest problem of a country. It is a matter of life and death. It is the way of survival or destruction. It cannot be done without scrutiny. These words of the famous philosopher Sun Tzu are one of the sentences that best summarize the current course of the Ukrainian war. In 2022, when the war began, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a 2-week time frame in his forecast for the war. But when we look at the past year, we can say that the Ukraine war has progressed far beyond Putin's predictions, especially recently. Nothing is going the way Putin wants in Bahamut. Unfortunately, Russian President Putin underestimated the Ukrainian army when Crimea was annexed in 2014. He thought that they would remain silent as the whole world was silent, and he quickly sent his army inside the Ukrainian border without preparing it. But at this point, Putin's hasty attitude has brought the Russian army to the brink of collapse. The Russian army, which was not properly armed and did not have sufficient plans, did not experience any tangible war gains, although it continued to exist in 4 important regions of Ukraine. This, of course, has done a lot of damage to the Russian economy and Putin's popularity in the country. After the war started, Russia, which was subjected to economic sanctions by the whole world, came to the brink of bankruptcy with the heavy economic burden of the war. Although Putin tries to take economic measures in his own way, we see that these measures do not provide any benefit. At this point, the Russian president has to offer a war win to one of his people, at least to regain his popularity at home. With the partial mobilization decision announced last autumn, the impact of the war on the Russian people has become very negative, and this situation will not improve without giving them a win. Putin and the Russian army have long focused on one place for this achievement. The city of Bahamut of the Donetsk Oblast was the place where the heaviest clashes of the war took place. The armies of the two countries are fighting fiercely here. The Ukrainian army successfully dodges the Russian attacks here, causing the Russian army to suffer huge losses. The Russian army, on the other hand, cannot pass the steel curtain of the Ukrainian defense despite all its efforts. So why does Russia want Bahamut? Russia has explained for the first time why for months it has flocked its troops to seize the industrial city of Bahamut in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. If Bahamut falls, the Russian armed forces will be able to advance into Ukraine. Bahamut has witnessed some of the most intense fighting in Russia's Ukraine war that began last February. Clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces are escalating fiercely as Moscow seeks its first major combat victory since the summer of 2022. Moreover, the Wagner Group founded by Vladimir Putin's ally, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was heavily involved in Russia's Bahamut offensive alongside conventional Russian troops. Russian officials state that Bahamut is an important defense center of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbas region. The city acts as a regional hub with highways to strategic cities in the Donbas, such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. The containment of Bahamut will allow further offensive actions for the Russian army deeper into the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. But Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has made it clear that his troops will not withdraw from the city. Zelensky's senior commanders suggested to him not to retreat and instead strengthen the city's defenses. The command unanimously supported this position, and the Ukrainian chief of staff was ordered to find suitable forces to assist the troops in Bahamut. Ukraine's Interior Ministry also outlined the importance of Bahamut remaining under Ukrainian control. Bahamut is a living wall that allows the Ukrainian troops not to hold back from the war. Successful defense of the city could put the Ukrainians in a position to launch a counterattack. The Russian army has lost a tremendous amount of people and equipment in this direction. They have been trying to seize Bahamut for months and have been unsuccessful. Bahamut has great symbolic value for Russia. The situation is the most complicated at the moment, but the Ukrainian defense stands strong and performs combat missions. Many analysts said that while Bahamut himself may have little strategic value, Russia would use the city as a stepping stone to one of its stated war objectives. Capturing the entire Donbas region and the Russian capture of Bahamut would determine the course of the war. Unless Bahamut is taken, it is impossible for the Russian military to achieve Putin's war goals in Ukraine. There is no way to take Donbas without taking Bahamut, and taking Donbas is one of the main tasks of the Russian military operation. So what is the situation in Bahamut right now? At the last point, the Ukrainian forces hold an important Trudin and out of Bahamut in the Donetsk region. The corresponding statement was made by Deputy Commander of the Svoboda Battalion National Guard Lieutenant Vladimir Nazarenko. The armed forces of Ukraine hold the Bahamut-Kostiantinivka highway and conduct a fairly stable defense. The situation around Bahamut and its suburbs is very infernal as it is on the entire Eastern Front. The Bahamut-Kostiantinivka highway is a very important route to transport supplies to the city, and the Ukrainian presence there has prevented any possible Russian supplies. There have been no tactical changes on the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainian army is holding the defense. On the other hand, they look for weakness in the Russian army, try to distract the Ukrainian forces by fighting, withdraw their reserves, try to combine different methods and tactics, but fail in such efforts. Increasing claims about the possible withdrawal of Ukraine from the city also do not reflect the truth. There is no retreat. On the contrary, some new reserve Ukrainian troops are arriving as reinforcements to hold the defense. The entire battlefield is under a chaotic bombardment, but the Ukrainian army remains in contact with the city. There are incontrols. This situation, of course, has put the Bahamut war into a very difficult process for Russia. But for Russia, Bahamut has become a matter of honor. So what happens if Russia captures Bahamut? Bahamut is not just a simple city. It is part of a heavily fortified defensive line, a city with long underground tunnels and walls. That's why the Russian army's capture of this castle seems quite difficult in the current state. The fall of Bahamut will allow it to reach other settlements in the Donetsk region after Bahamut. The Russian army could attack cities such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk after Bahamut. The road to other Ukrainian towns in the direction of Donetsk becomes clear for the Russians. And that's why the Ukrainian army has set up an unprecedented defense line in Bahamut. Russian officials claim that Russia currently controls the entire eastern part of Bahamut, but the Ukrainian chief of staff argues the opposite. Well, isn't there another place that Rylianus sees is again and wants to take besides Bahamut? It was alleged that Russia could risk launching a new attack on the city of Volodar in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine. Until recently, the Russian command saw a breakthrough in Volodar as a key way to achieve an operationally significant breakthrough on the Ukrainian battlefield. Volodar witnessed intense fighting in January and February as Russian troops tried to seize the town. The capture of Volodar strengthened the possibility that the war could turn in Moscow's favor. But the Ukrainian army inflicted the loss of dozens of armored vehicles and soldiers on the Russian army in an unsuccessful attempt by Russian forces to capture the eastern Ukrainian town. Russian planners will likely face the dilemma of attempting another Volodar offensive or supporting intense fighting further north near Bahamut and Kremenna. Volodar could have been a new, very important acquisition for the Russian army at that time. Taking control of this settlement would have given Russian troops access to the Krasnoarmeysk-Kakhovskaya directions. But the Russian attack on Volodar was reportedly stopped by the end of the first week of February. As in the sentence we quoted you at the beginning, Russian President Putin apparently started the war without scrutinizing it. There is no other explanation for the fact that the Russian army suffered such heavy losses and could not make any gains despite being the attacking party. It is difficult to know how this war, which left its mark on the 21st century, will end at the moment. But it seems that in the end it is already clear who will lose everything. Every human being becomes part of a family, a country, and a faith from the moment they are born. These innate bonds begin to change over time. If a person manages to think freely, it questions all his ties. As a result of this questioning, everyone has their own identity. This questioning usually starts in time of crisis, and wars are the biggest crises in many wars throughout history. Soldiers have switched sides because no one wants to fight for the wrong cause. In the Russian army, many soldiers have switched sides since the beginning of the war. The Kremlin leadership is in panic over the soldiers' defections in particular. A report in the Ukrainian press today has the Putin government much worried. This extraordinary event is the biggest indicator of how bad Russia is as a daily news team. We investigated this extraordinary event for you. Our team did a lot of research for the preparation of this news. Our experts made striking analysis about this event. Let's start it together. Russia is going through a period of great decline because the Russian people have been manipulated for many years. The Russian Federation has been ruled by Vladimir Putin since 1999. Putin has constantly manipulated the Russian people using state power. He did everything he could to make Russian citizens have anti-Western ideas, but he has not succeeded. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has inflicted enormous damage on the Putin regime. The Russian army is suffering a historic defeat in this war. But to hide this defeat, Putin is constantly giving false news to the Russian people. Putin's government hides the death toll and gives false information about the course of the war. But as the war drags on, this information is proving to be false. Since the beginning of the war, Putin has been claiming that the Russian army has a very strong position in Ukraine, but the Russian army is in an extremely bad shape. Russian soldiers know that Putin is lying. The revelation that Putin is lying has two different consequences in Russia. First, the Russian people are angry with Putin and no longer trust him. As a result, they follow Western news sources. Russian citizens have started to follow many international news organizations, including daily news. This is leading to Russian citizens learning the truth. Having learned the truth, the Russian people realized that they have been manipulated by Putin for many years. Russian people no longer support Putin. The second is a much worse outcome for Putin. Russian soldiers are shocked when they realize that the news about the war is a lie. Realizing that this war was started only for Putin's political interest, Russian soldiers leave the army for mutiny. Some Russian soldiers do something much braver. They decide to join the Ukrainian army to fight against Putin. Russian soldiers who changed sides are the talk of the world. Vladislav Amasov is one of those soldiers. Amasov served in the Russian army for 15 years. He held many senior positions in Russia's main intelligence directorate. He participated in the Second Chechen War and became a very important soldier for the Russian army. It was during this war that he began to criticize the repression of the Chechens. That was the first time he thought that the Russian army might be wrong. In 2014, when Putin decided to invade Crimea, he resigned from the Russian army. Amosov did not want to be part of this war, for innocent people would be harmed as a result of his resignation from the army. There was a lot of news about him in Russia. Pro-peace Russian citizens supported Amosov unless his leaving the army also affected many Russian soldiers. But Amosov's last move was a nightmare for the Russian army. Amosov announced that he decided to join the Ukrainian army to fight against Putin. He gave an interview to the Ukrainian press and said the following: "I finally realized that we were slaves to the system created by Putin and his clique. I had no choice but to free myself from it." Coming from the remote Siberian city of Yakutsk, Amosov made a call, especially to the people living in this region. Amosov announced that he has started preparations to form a unit called the Siberian Battalion, with soldiers from Russia joining this unit. Amosov plans to become a more effective force, and then his plans are very clear. Amosov plans to act together with the Ukrainian army because his first goal is for the Russian army to lose this war. According to Amosov, if the Russian army loses this war, the Putin's regime will face a huge crisis. Separatist movements in Russia will become more prominent. The Siberian Battalion, which Amosov will lead, will play a very important role at this stage. The Siberian Battalion will form a military force to end Putin's regime. The Siberian Battalion will enter Moscow and remove Putin from office. At the moment, Amosov's military power is not strong enough to enter Moscow, but according to Amosov, this will change very soon. If Putin loses this war, there will be chaos in Russia. As you know, there are 22 republics in the Russian Federation. These regions are mostly inhabited by minorities. Most of the Muslims living in Russia are in these regions. Putin imposes cultural and religious repression in these regions. If Russia loses this war, there will be more demands for independence in these regions. This could lead to the breakup of Russia. On the other hand, there is a great chaos within the Russian army. The fights between Russian commanders are growing day by day. The possibility of conflict between different groups within the Russian army is very high. This could lead to a huge security weakness in Russia. Most of the experts analyzing the future of Russia claim that Russia will experience great chaos when Putin's regime falls as a result of this chaos. Anti-Putin Russian commanders may gain very important political power. Amosov may also take a critical position for Russia in this period. Amosov wants to end Putin's rule and make Russia a free country. Russia's aggressive and repressive policies are now widely criticized. When Putin's regime comes to an end, the Russian government is expected to undergo a major change. Amosov, therefore, believes that Putin's rule must end in order to save Russia. And Amosov is not alone. Many Russian soldiers have already mobilized to fight against Putin. The Free Russia Legion, acting together with the Ukrainian army, inflicted great damage on Putin's army. The Free Russia Legion is also followed by the Russian people. Russian citizens who oppose Putin's oppressive policies support the Free Russia Legion. Amosov's Siberian Battalion is expected to act together with the Free Russia Legion. These two units are also damaging Putin's reputation. Putin claimed that this war was between the Russian people and the Western countries, but the Russians fighting against Putin have revealed the truth. The Russian people now know that this war was started only for Putin's political interests. Amosov's statements are followed with great interest by the Russian public. Amosov is expected to activate the Siberian Battalion in a short time. It is reported that the Siberian Battalion will publish a manifesto. This manifesto will be addressed to the whole world and the Russian people. The manifesto will include the goals and objectives of the Siberian Battalion fighting against Putin.